for this dissent. These organisations offer a space where individual experiences can become shared interests. They offer a platform from which to articulate these shared interests of groups experiencing inequality, from which to seek to negotiate change, and from which to hold the powerful to account for these inequalities. However, the capacity of community organisations to dissent has been attacked and compromised, in particular by the state, with an agenda of control and forced consensus. The starting point for state marginalisation of this dissent is one of policy fragmentation and division. Institutions, policy and legislation are divided across different but interlinked equality objectives. Economic inequality is deemed to be an issue of poverty, the responsibility of a now defunct Combat Poverty Agency, and a focus for a national anti-poverty strategy. Cultural equality in relation to identity, status and diversity is deemed the responsibility of an equality authority and a focus for anti-discrimination legislation. This policy fragmentation, I believe, serves to diminish the demand for greater equality and to divide those organisations seeking to articulate such a demand and such dissent. This problematic context for dissent has been further complicated by recent government decisions to in effect dismantle this equality infrastructure. The Combat Poverty Agency has been subsumed into a government department. The Equality Authority has been rendered unviable through severe and disproportionate budget cuts and decentralisation. Recession has effectively provided the cover to silence two independent and authoritative voices for equality. This, I believe, diminishes the accountability of the state in relation to equality and reduces the space for dissent available to the community sector. This space for dissent, of course, available to the community sector, I believe, had already been diminished through an overt, organised and aggressive agenda of control pursued by the state. The state has sought to marginalise dissent through the control of ideas, the control of funding to the sector, and the control of the statutory community sector policy dialogue. The state has celebrated its commitment to equality at home and abroad. It is, however, a most limited form of equality that it puts forward, a form of equality concerned with fairness and individual opportunity, rather than outcomes and real change for groups experiencing inequality. Yet this limited ambition for equality ends up becoming established as the standard which we have to defend. The state has advanced themes of active citizenship and social capital to support cohesive and content communities. These, however, are themes divorced from the reality of inequalities of status, of power and of resources experienced by these communities. These themes involve a rhetoric that promotes connectedness and voluntary endeavour, but ignores enduring contexts of inequality and disadvantage. This rhetoric then comes to define what might be appropriate goals for the work of the community sector. The dependence of the community sector on state funding has allowed the state to determine a role of service provision for the sector, to the exclusion almost of advocacy roles. This is achieved through the activities for which funding is made available, and, as Stan has said, through restrictive criteria attached to this funding, criteria that limit or even prohibit the funded organisation from engaging in advocacy or dissent. There's a growing bureaucratic burden that accompanies this funding. Administration, planning, evaluation and accountability to the state drain the resources and energy of the funded organisation, and above all, limit the flexibility required for dissent and advocacy. Threats have also been deployed to limit dissent. Most recently, organisations involved in the Equality and Rights Alliance, the campaign to restore the budgets of the Equality Authority and the Irish Human Rights Commission, have had their funding threatened due to their involvement in this campaign. Social partnership at national and local level has become the dominant means of policy engagement between the community sector and the state. Social partnership has become also an increasingly controlled environment. Non-adversarial partnership is required. Policy dialogue is deemed to be problem-solving, and problem-solving in the absence of any so-called ideological baggage. This limited partnership is offered, but as people have said, influence is increasingly limited. While policy gains, I believe, can be identified from social partnership involvement at national level in earlier times, the current experience of this policy engagement is one of frustration for the community sector. Recession has also provided cover for dismantling parts of the community sector. Significant funding cuts have already been made. Organisations have been forced to close, to downsize and to restructure, and this too inevitably diminishes any capacity for dissent. There are, of course, issues to be identified in the approach of community organisations themselves that have contributed to this diminishing space for dissent. And while there are organisations in the sector that have admirably managed to avoid or overcome these issues nonetheless have a relevance to any examination of the sector's role in dissent and bringing forward an alternative model of development. There have been divisions in the sector. These can be a product of increasing competition for funding, of tensions between those working within social partnership and those who are outside this process by choice or by exclusion, and a product of fragmentation in the sector due to a mirroring of that policy fragmentation evident in state policy making. And these divisions have limited the capacity of the community sector to build the solidarity necessary for cohesive action and for movement building, developments that are vital to effective dissent. Issues can also be identified in the approach to social partnership. Social partnership, I believe, works best for the sector where a dual strategy is pursued of negotiation within social partnership and direct action outside of social partnership. This dual strategy maximises influence within negotiations and it secures a wider public debate on key policy decisions required. However, divisions between those in social partnership and those not participating has limited possibilities for such a dual strategy. Inadequate resources have limited the ability of organisations to commit to both negotiation and direct action. A culture of non-adversarial partnership also serves to diminish commitment to such a dual strategy. There are further issues then of agenda development by the community sector and its capacity to imagine an alternative to the current model of development. The cultural dominance of the current model of development has stifled debate on alternatives. Bureaucratic burdens, the demands of participation in social partnership, and scarce resources have served to limit the quality of the policy agenda brought forward. The slow pace of change results in policy agendas becoming stale, although still remaining relevant, and it has been difficult to reformulate and re-energise such policy agendas. Issues too can also be identified in the engagement of the community sector with political parties. Tradition has been to steer clear of being associated with any particular political party. Engagement with party politics has been limited to a general lobby of all parties around particular policy commitments, rather than any search for a specific dialogue with those political parties committed to an egalitarian model of development. In ensuring that the sector is not captured by any political party, the sector has been unable to engage in such a dialogue, which I believe is necessary to both build party political commitment to implementing such an egalitarian model of development and to enhance the space for dissent. In conclusion, recession has created an increasingly difficult context for dissent. However, recession is a time of significant social and economic change, a time when old certainties begin to crumble. As such, it's also a time of opportunity for dissent and for bringing forward alternative models of development with a capacity to achieve equality. It's not therefore surprising that the state seeks to intensify its control of dissent at such a time. Equally though, it would be surprising for the community sector not to seek to take advantage of this opportunity to break down the barriers that marginalise dissent and to put forward an alternative model of development. And I think this is something that can already be seen in initiatives such as the Is Féidirlinn initiative, where community activists and others are bringing forward debate on an alternative model of development and seeking to build alliances around this. There's a battle for ideas to be engaged in, a battle that needs to challenge the state control in this area and to assert equality as a core value.